Video games really have evolved quite a lot through the decades. What started as a clump of pixels moving across a screen to provide a few minutes of fun has now led to 100-hour journeys through vast worlds and masterfully written stories. As such, characters in video games have also changed greatly since the days of the Atari 2600. Most games nowadays like to put an emphasis on the characters present in them, and they can be some of the best parts of a game. And today, I feel like talking about my personal favorites. So you know what? I'm going to do just that. Now before we begin, a few things to establish. Besides the obvious play before put rule and one per franchise rule, I'm going to make note of a few things. This is a favorite video game characters list, meaning this is entirely my opinion and not at all an official best characters of all time list. Also, with a list like this, it's pretty much expected, but I'll say it anyway, there will be spoilers. Now that we've taken care of that, let us commence. So we're going to start this list with a bit of a curveball, because our first candidate is from a franchise I haven't talked about that much on this channel, that being the Street Fighter series. Oh, you mean that series with a bunch of generic, one-dimensional characters that are mostly clones of each other? If you asked me that before 2014, I would have said yes. But after actually playing some of the games in the series, I can confirm that this isn't actually true. I'm not going to say the entire roster is three-dimensional, because there are some flat characters amongst everyone, but at the same time, there are actually some pretty dynamic characters in this series. Case in point, Ken Masters. Now before any of you claim that Ken is just a blatant Ryu clone, all I have to say is that I don't recall Ryu ever having super hot fire! Though in all seriousness, there's actually quite a lot of differences between Ken and Ryu, both in playstyle and personality. What do you say we cover the latter first? While Ryu is far more stoic and not much for words, Ken is way more energetic and loves to brag a lot. However, his arrogance never gets annoying and it never makes him hateable, because at the same time, he almost always respects his opposition, whether it be friend or rival. He's an easygoing and overall good person, which is one of the reasons I like him so much. He can be a beast in battle, but he's still a likable guy. You can also get easily worried when it comes to his family, as seen by the fact that he almost didn't join the tournament Street Fighter 4 because his wife was nearing her due date. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Ken's a dad. Not so generic now, is he? His gameplay is also a big highlight for me. He did start off as a Ryu clone in the original Street Fighter, but since then, Ken's playstyle has had a larger emphasis on speed and style. And fire. Ken's one of those characters that's really good for newcomers, but still good on a competitive level. Plus, like many other characters in the series, seeing Ken in action can be a real treat for the eyes. Even 137, anyone? So all in all, Ken's got a lot going for him that I like. I really enjoy his playstyle, and his personality makes him that much better for me. Also, he's voiced by Ruben Langdon. Yes, that's Ruben Langdon.
This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
It's kind of weird to say this, but I have sort of a love-hate relationship with the Kingdom Hearts series. On one hand, the games are beyond fun, some of the most fun I've had with a video game. But on the other hand, I'm not the biggest fan of the story. A lot of the time, I feel like it tries way too hard, and this leads to some pretty goofy moments. Doesn't help that they end up throwing in wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff in Dream Drop Distance, like the story wasn't confusing enough, but I digress. As for the characters, there's only a small portion of the characters that I actually like. That being said, there is an exception in this series, that being Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. The game is still really fun, but I legitimately liked the story and characters in it, most notably the three main protagonists, which brings us to our number 14 candidate, Terra. While any of the three protagonists in Birth by Sleep could have easily made it onto this list, I picked Terra because of how human he feels as a character, a trait that I really enjoy about him. He's a Keyblade apprentice like Aqua and Ventus, and has a heart of gold underneath his more calm and collective appearance, but his humanity is present in his flaw, that being the constant temptation to embrace his darker side. Yes, I'm aware other characters have gone through this sort of inner conflict before, both in other stories and even in Kingdom Hearts, but I feel like it's done really well in Terra's case. He's also a very trustworthy person, a trait that I can admire, but this also backfires as he can be sometimes too trustworthy, as seen by the fact that several villains in Birth by Sleep exploit this trait of Terra for their own gain, especially Xehanort, which leads to another great part about Terra, his willingness to learn. Right from the beginning, when he doesn't pass the mark of mastery because of his inner darkness, Terra constantly spends the rest of his journey making mistakes, but also learns from them. Most notably when his overly trusting ways lead to his master's death and his body being used as a younger vessel for Xehanort. Granted, he managed to merge his consciousness with his armor, turning him into the lingering will, but now he's stuck without his actual body. That's gotta suck. Hopefully things will turn out better for him by the end of Kingdom Hearts 3. And we finally get it, that is. You know the phrase, you can't judge a book by its cover? Well, this can apply to people too. Just because someone might be committing acts that are considered crimes, that doesn't automatically make them a terrible person. Just look at Rhythm Thief's stylish protagonist. Under the identity of university student Raphael by day, this man is better known as the classy art thief Phantomar. But despite being a criminal, this guy is far from being an evil person. In fact, he's pretty much the polar opposite. Phantomar has many traits that people would consider those of a good human being. He's able to keep a cool head even in the toughest of situations, he's quite the gentleman as seen with his discussions with Marie, and, ironically enough, has actually quite a strong sense of honor. Not to mention, I don't think many people could look at what Phantomar is able to do and just shrug it off. Not only is he a master thief, but he's also an expert at both hiding from security and escaping capture with ease. And he can adapt to new tasks with a snap of the finger, like cooking, waiting, fist fighting, sword fighting, and even mech fighting. But of course, being the hero of a rhythm game and all, Phantomar's got quite the style when it comes to dancing. Keep in mind, he managed to use his dance moves to save Paris. How many people can say they've been able to do that? None that I can think of. Honestly, Phantomar is just an overall enjoyable character to see in action, whether it be him letting out silly lines of dialogue, pulling off epic acrobatic maneuvers, or just looking cool with that fedora of his. In fact, I'd love to see the continuation of Phantomar's story sometime soon. Hey Sega, you gonna do anything about that? Speaking of not judging books by their cover, let's talk about Skullgirls. Not being the biggest fan of sexual fan service, I admittedly had little to no interest in this indie fighting game. But I can honestly say that in the case of Skullgirls, this judgment was a terrible one to make. This is honestly one of the most well-crafted 2D fighters I've ever seen, and this is shown remarkably in the game's cast of characters. It may be small, but each character has plenty of traits, both gameplay-wise and personality-wise, that make them different from everyone else in the roster. So on that note, let's talk about the game's first DLC character, the most adorable zombie ever created, Squiggly. Prior to her death, Squiggly was known as Siena Contiello, the youngest member of a famous family of opera singers, but was assassinated alongside her parents when she was 14 by an agent of the Medici Mafia. However, before her death, her father released his parasite Leviathan and had him attached to her so that she would eventually return to life. Sure enough, when Marie became the Skullgirl and awoke many of the Canopy Kingdom's dead, Squiggly was brought back to life and managed to avoid becoming a mindless servant to the Skullgirl thanks to Leviathan's presence. While her backstory is one of the most dark and twisted in the Skullgirls universe, it still really helps make Squiggly such a unique character in the game's cast, as does her personality. Being raised by a very proper family, Squiggly is graceful and well-mannered, and she also has a better understanding of the situation with Marie than any other character in the game due to the fact that her mother was once a Skullgirl. Also, the chemistry between her and Leviathan is quite enjoyable, but in a different way than Philia and Samson, the other prominent human-parasite combo of the game. Because while Philia and Samson are never really on the same page, Squiggly and Leviathan share a strong bond and get along really well. This can also be applied in Squiggly's playstyle. Much like Philia and Samson, Squiggly doesn't do much of the fighting, letting Leviathan get most of the damage in from a long range. But very much unlike Philia and Samson, who seem to not be able to cooperate that well in battle, Squiggly and Leviathan are able to perfectly synchronize their attacks, almost as if they were dance partners. It's really impressive to watch, especially in the hands of a Skullgirls player who knows what they're doing. With all the colorful characters that Skullgirls introduces to the world, I feel like Squiggly really stands out, and for good reason. She's fun to play as and even to just watch in action, and her respectable characterization really helps in my liking of her, making her not just my main in Skullgirls, but also one of my favorite female video game characters. The next candidate can be summed up in 3 words. Yeah, that sounds about right. With such a crazily awesome roster like the one present in Sengoku Basara, you'd think that the guy with just a katana would be the least interesting character in the series. But as it turns out, Mitsunari Ishida says otherwise. Introduced as one of the 2 main characters of Sengoku Basara 3, Mitsunari became a fan favorite amongst Sengoku Basara's relatively small fanbase very quickly, and it's pretty easy to see why. Before the events of Sengoku Basara 3, Mitsunari was a soldier in the forces of
Sweet Lord Hideyoshi,
and was so obsessed with his commander that he treated him like a god. So, when ex-ally Ieyasu Tokugawa went ahead and killed Hideyoshi, you can bet that Mitsunari wasn't the happiest about this.
I will kill you!
Afterwards, he took control of Hideyoshi's forces and led them into war with only one goal in mind: to slaughter Ieyasu and avenge his lord. However, the sad part about this revenge plan is that when he finally succeeds in killing Ieyasu, he feels no satisfaction. In fact, he feels kind of empty, as he no longer has anything to fight for. Tragic story aside, what makes Mitsunari such a great character for me is his personality and playstyle. Personality-wise, Mitsunari is an absolute nut. But at the same time, when he's not screaming Ieyasu's name in wrath, his cool and collected attitude makes him pretty interesting too, giving off a real intimidation factor, which is further multiplied when you see Mitsunari in action. In a nutshell, Mitsunari is what would happen if you took Virgil from Devil May Cry and took away his Devil Trigger. In other words, absolute chaos! Out of all the playable characters in the original version of Sengoku Basara 3, Mitsunari easily has the fastest attacks, and in turn has some of the best combo potential, which of course means more satisfaction. Seriously, whenever I'm having a really bad day and I need to let out some frustration, all I need to do is just run through Mitsunari's story. It's some of the most satisfaction I've ever had with a video game, hands down. In conclusion, Mitsunari really does help capture what I love so much about the Sengoku Basara series. He has a twisted and emotional storyline, he has an intriguing personality, and it's beyond fun to unleash my inner maniac when playing as him. Oh, this is so satisfying! If there's one character archetype that's perfectly split on the love-hate ratio, it's the troll character. On one hand, many people hate these kind of characters for their cruel acts and for taking pleasure in these acts. And on the other hand, many people love these kinds of characters for how entertaining they can be throughout what they do. It's really subjective taste, and personally, I find myself enjoying these characters more than hating them. And on that note, let's talk about Hazama. Oh, Hazama, why are you so beautifully evil? Seriously, BlazBlue may have some great characters, but I feel like Hazama is probably the most standout of the roster just for how much of a complete troll he is to pretty much everyone in the cast. He's acted like a true scumbag with some of the things he's done, and many people have grown to hate him, both in-game and among the fanbase. But you know what? I can't find it in myself to hate him. How can I hate a man when he's this entertaining? I mean, yeah, he's done some truly evil things, but he just has so much insane fun with everything he does that it's hard not to enjoy his presence whenever he's on screen. This can also be applied to his playstyle. Hazama's a pretty tricky character to learn, but with his Ouroboros drive that allows him to fling himself all over the arena, he's just way too much fun for my own good. I think that's the main reason I like Hazama so much. He's a fun character. He overall amplifies my enjoyment levels on BlazBlue, whether it be in battle or in cutscenes. Oh, and one more thing. That freaking laugh! And now we move from one troll character to another. If you ever want an example of a true show stealer of a character, look no further than Masahiro Sakurai's incarnation of the Lord of the Underworld, Hades. Serving as the main antagonist of Kid Icarus Uprising and, as it turns out, the Kid Icarus series as a whole, Hades is one of those characters that, despite what they end up doing, you just can't find yourself able to hate. I mean, this is the guy who makes his first appearance by literally tearing apart the credits. Where do you go wrong with that? The overall appeal for this character, or at least in my case, is in how much of an absolute trollish villain he can be. I mean, he could be spending his time building up his underworld army into an unstoppable force of absolute chaos, but instead, he decides to use his spare time to make poor Pity Pat wish he didn't make that 25-year comeback.
Oh snap! Or please not do.
This might not be the best time to rub salt in the wound.
But why stop at our hero? Hades has no problem poking fun at the other members of Uprising's cast, most notably Palutena and Viridi.
Excellent job, Pit.
Excellent might be overstated.
So yeah, he's great at being a real thorn on the protagonist's sides. But how is he as a villain? What does he actually accomplish? Well, he was the one who resurrected Medusa at the beginning of Uprising, which fueled the events of the first third of the game. Then he got you to defeat the Phoenix and let the world know about the Wish Siege, which triggered a worldwide war, which in turn got Viridi and her forces of nature involved, which led to the conflict between Palutena's army and Viridi's army, which led to the destruction of the Lunar Sanctum and the release of the Chaos Skin, which led to everything that happened after the 3-year time jump. Oh, and the Orm forces invaded Earth because they sensed a high amount of conflict occurring, which, as established before, was jump-started by Hades, and even before the events of Uprising, Hades was the one who gave Medusa enough resources to overtake Palutena in the first game. So, in other words, Hades caused literally everything in Uprising! And man, did he help make this game such a memorably hilarious one. It's a little unfortunate to see him get destroyed at the end of the game, but hey, at least he's not actually dead. Maybe he'll somehow make a return in the next Kid Icarus game. If they do another Kid Icarus game. Hey guys, have you heard? Maverick likes Crash Bandicoot. Not sure how on earth you could have figured that out before. Nah, in all seriousness, I love this series. And one of the biggest reasons behind my love for these games is the characters. I mean, yeah, they're not the most three-dimensional characters, in fact, they're pretty much the polar opposite, but even with their simple characterization, these characters really help make these games so enjoyable. And this is especially shown in the franchise's villains, most notably the scientist characters. Dr. Neo Cortex, Dr. Nitrous Brio, Dr. Nefarious Troopy, they're all great. But in my opinion, the highlight of the Crash series cast goes to the mad cyborg genius, Dr. Engine. I've seen some pretty funny video game characters in my years, but Engine still stands for the most hilarious characters I've ever seen, not just in video games, but in all media. Though even before his days of comedy, he was a pretty awesome character. Engine was a student at Madame Amberley's Academy of Evil when he first met series villain Cortex and his eventual colleague Brio. After graduating from the Academy, Engine went ahead and became a physicist in the defense industry. But due to a budget cut, one of his missile experiments went wrong and ended up lodging into Engine's head. Fortunately, Engine was smart enough to reconstruct the missile into a makeshift life support system, but this in turn shattered his sanity. But enough of his backstory, let's talk about his personality. At the beginning of the series, Engine played the role of Cortex's loyal right-hand man, but he was also less impulsive and liked to think his plans through before making a decision. A trait that ended up leading to numerous occasions of Engine questioning his superior's plans and getting chewed out for it. But by the time Crash Nitro came around, Engine's sanity began to slip away even more. And in my opinion, this is where Engine started to become really entertaining.
Missed me. Now look at yourself. What do you see? Ugly. I'm right behind you. Kidding. 9.81 meters per second squared!
Yeah, he wasn't as creepy and unsettling as he was in the original games, but honestly, this comical nature of his works really well for a character like him. And I haven't even mentioned Crash Tag Team Racing. At this point, Engine wasn't as prominent as before, but my goodness, he was still just as amazing.
Now I am just so mad, Crash. I feel like my brain is coming out of my eyes and dripping down my cheeks. I'm so mad. Get me that plutonium if you know it's good for you.
The cast of the Crash series may have gone through a drastic change as the years went on, most for the worst. But in Engine's case, he stayed just as good throughout the years, maybe even better than before. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
I'm sorry. I'm not here to take your message right now. Please leave a message after the beep. Beep! I'm going. It was worth a shot.